Hello, everyone. I'm Carly, and license and registration is required for this episode. Welcome to Read Receipts, and welcome back to our summer long feature event, the Come As You Are mini-series, where we dive into topics from the book of the same name by Emily Nagoski. While you certainly can learn about your own sexuality through these episodes, I highly recommend listening, reading her book yourself, especially if you want to get a deeper understanding of these topics. And I want to say up at the top, thank you, Emily, for your contributions to society. If you are new here, I highly recommend also going back to our first episode of this series so that way you can get a little bit of an introduction of what we are doing here, get a little bit more background as to why we're doing this, what you can get out of it, blah, 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 blah. But in today's episode, we are talking about the not so basic basics, aka the things that are a little more basic to our sexuality, but you might not know about and are not really commonly known in our world. And part of that is because they're not really physically part of our sexuality. To be clear, even the basics that were in the last episode weren't really basics because I expected everyone to know about it. If that was the case, I wouldn't have talked about them to begin with. But these are just like the extra, like, odds are you haven't heard of this stuff because this was groundbreaking information to me. These are basics because these are fundamental to everyone, no matter the sex you were defined with at birth, how you identify now, and your sexual identity. And I personally really enjoy the metaphors that Emily used in this section of the book, so I am going to run with those. Emily describes that we have a dual control model for sexual response, meaning that there are two ways our brains react to sensations. The two parts of this, in more scientific terms, are called the sexual excitation system and the sexual inhibition system. So SES and SIS. But for ease and understanding, we are going to call them the accelerator and the brakes for your sexual response. And I feel like these names are also a little bit more self-explanatory because obviously if, say, a sexual sensation, not even I guess sexual, but if a sensation excites you, then it is going to hit the accelerator. You're going to be like, yes, take me to that. I want more. That sort of line of thinking. And conversely, if you experience something that you don't like, then you might start hitting your brakes unintentionally. Now, unlike a typical accelerator and brake that you might have in a car, you can't actually control these accelerators and brakes. Your mind is always scanning the environment for inputs and is either going to accelerate or brake based on those things. So because your brain is taking into consideration everything about your environment, everything that you are perceiving and sensing, there might be times that you are in a situation where, say, you are wondering to yourself, why aren't I feeling more turned on? I'm in a pretty objectively sexy situation. I feel like I should be more turned on than I am. Or conversely, you might be in a situation where you are like, I have no reason to feel as turned on as I am. Why am I experiencing this? And so that's basically why. You could be in a sexy situation, but because of lots of different factors, you might not really be feeling turned on because your brakes are on and you didn't decide that. That's just how your brain is operating. But now that you know that there is a dual control model system, you can try to narrow down on if you need to press on your accelerator a little bit more or if maybe you need to pull off the brakes. Similar to our real life cars, our brakes and accelerators are not just a simple turn off a light switch, turn on a light switch. Our accelerator and brakes have different sensitivity levels as well. And so this can kind of further complicate things or maybe make things easier depending on how you partake. So if you have a highly sensitive accelerator, you might personally feel as though you have an easy time being turned on. You don't really have much of a problem with getting into sex once it starts going on. But if you experience a low sensitivity accelerator, then it might take a lot more effort for you to get your accelerator going. You know, it might not just be like, I'm thinking about sex, now I'm turned on. It might be like, okay, I'm thinking about sex, but like we're not doing it. I'm not seeing you, there might be a lot of different factors that might get your accelerating going. I'm not going to speak on behalf of you on what exactly that looks like for you. But say you like pectorals and it's like, well, if I were looking at some pectorals, I think my accelerator would be going a little more. Add pectorals to the situation. If, say, you really like it when someone rubs your feet, that's not me personally, and we don't kink shame here. So anyway, maybe you need to have a little bit of a foot rub also to get your accelerator going. And maybe you need like a nice scent in the air and it's like, ooh, that also is like pushing on my accelerator a little bit, right? Like, if you have a low sensitivity accelerator, you basically just might need to add on more things for that accelerator to be pressed down a little bit further and further for you to get to where you're going. And naturally, obviously, this same situation can go for brakes. You might have highly sensitive brakes where it really doesn't take a whole lot for you to not want to have sex. You know, you might have, like, say, a bad day at work or something. And so that already is going to, like, take it completely off the table for you that you do not want to have sex that day. Or you might be tired, or, like, you know, it doesn't even necessarily have to be. We're going to talk about this a little bit more in a minute, but it doesn't even necessarily have to be exactly like stimuli related in that same way. But like, you might have sensitive breaks, or for instance, say like, maybe a more fitting example with like what we've been talking about is the person that you are maybe about to have sex with has bad breath. Maybe you have really sensitive breaks, and that is gonna turn you off, and you're gonna be like, nope, I don't want to do this anymore. And that might be a little bit of a problem. And obviously, conversely, you might be someone who has a low sensitivity break where it odds are something isn't going to turn you off. You're going to be pretty gung-ho for stuff in most situations. And again, as we kind of talked about in the last episode, we are all made up of the same parts, organized in different ways. That applied in the last episode more physically, but in this episode, it also applies to us mentally, that we all have accelerators and brakes, but not all of us have them in the same exact sensitivity levels. So it's going to look a little different for all of us, and all of it is normal. Of course, looking at sensitivity, odds are most people somewhere fit in the middle between low and high sensitivity for their accelerators and brakes, but it's good to kind of know these things about yourself in case you are someone who falls a little bit more into one category or another. This is another example of a time where I will recommend, once again, looking into getting the physical version of this book, because one of the worksheets that Emily has in here is a worksheet, or not even a worksheet. It's like a quiz for both your accelerators and brakes to get an idea of how sensitive you are, if they are kind of average sensitivity, are they less sensitive, higher sensitive, all that sort of stuff. So that way you kind of have a better roadmap for understanding how your accelerator and brakes work. For instance, if you want an example, I signed up for this series, so I'm gonna say this stuff. I've never said it at the beginning, but I'm a little bit like, if you know me in real life, proceed at your own risk that I might be talking about myself in some of these episodes. But I'm gonna do it for the sake of, you know, relatability and people kind of getting a better understanding of this stuff naturally. So, for instance, I am someone that has kind of a mid to low sensitive break. So for the most part, I feel like I'm pretty average in that regard, but maybe slightly on the lower side. She has it divvied up by like high, mid, low sensitivity, but you can still see the range of like where exactly you fall. So I think I was like either the very bottom of the middle range of sensitivity for brakes or right at the top of low, somewhere in that area. And then for accelerator, I was actually on the higher side. So, you know, it might not make a whole lot of difference, but in case you are someone who falls a little bit closer to one of those extremes, it could be really helpful information to understand why you might struggle one way or another with either getting in the mood or whatever with sex. But we're going to now add another layer to this whole situation to understanding your sexuality, and that is context. The example that our girl Emily gives in the book is that when someone tickles you, it is a very context dependent thing. In some situations, it can be kind of fun and flirty, because say if it's with someone that you like, it might be like, ooh, we're getting closer, they're touching me, and like, I like this, and this is kind of fun. But if it's with someone that you don't like, and not even necessarily with the person might not necessarily be the context that we are concerned with, but like in the right situations, you might really like tickling. Personally, for me, I don't relate to this at all. I hate tickling, and when people touch near my armpit, I automatically start throwing fists. So don't come near me. But I think for a lot of people, this is the case, where there are some situations where tickling is like, even for someone like me who hates tickling, it's like kind of fun in the right context. But in the wrong context, you might be like, get the fuck off me. I don't want to see your face again. Punch, punch, punch. Maybe don't punch, but like also, in my opinion, it's a little bit of self-defense. If no one's listening to you, you better do whatever. Do what you gotta do. And so this just kind of is an example to explain how, depending on the context, the same action can happen, but depending on what's going on, you might not like it. It might not be doing the same thing for you one way or another. So let's think about a more specific example that can kind of be like somewhat sex related. Let's say like a shoulder rub. Maybe in some situations, a shoulder rub is something that could turn you on. Maybe in a situation, if you were thinking about a time that you experienced a shoulder rub and it was a little bit more like hidden on the accelerator, maybe you felt particularly safe and cared for in that moment. But maybe at other times, if you can recall a time that someone was trying to give you a shoulder rub and it wasn't very enjoyable, maybe you didn't feel particularly supported and cared for in that relationship or in that moment. Maybe there was a bit of tenseness going on. And I'm trying to stay a little bit vague because obviously it can be feelings that you have like kind of towards another person, but it doesn't have to be that. It can be very much environmental and like situational to like just everything that you've been experiencing. You might still feel supported and safe in your relationship, but because you had a bad day at work or you didn't get very much sleep, something along those lines, those same actions can maybe feel like they're hitting on your brakes more than they're hitting on your accelerator. Basically, if it can affect your state of mind, then it can also affect the context through which you are experiencing these inputs. Context is really important to understand because already as women, we tend to beat ourselves up for a lot of different things, for the changes that we experience as we age. I think that we can sometimes feel as though we don't enjoy sex as much as we used to, and that we might feel broken or wrong in some way. And I think it especially is hard when you are someone who has that comparative point to say, well, I did used to enjoy it at some point, so why is it that I don't now? Obviously, there are probably plenty of women also who have never really enjoyed sex. Like, I think that is, to compare to a lot of books, I can even think about First Time Caller by B.K. Boris, that was something that got brought up with the female main character in that book, is that she felt as though she never has really enjoyed sex until she's with this guy. And so both experiences are completely valid and possible, but I do think it's even worse and more likely that you might beat yourself up if at some point earlier on in your life you did enjoy sex, and then as you get a little bit older and your context changes, you might enjoy it less. And it's easy to be hard on yourself and feel as though there is something wrong with you and something has changed about you. And I think because of the fact that there is something that is changing, it is easy to look at it as though, well, I can't get back to where I used to be. But as we have talked about before, and as we are going to continue to say, we are all normal. We are all normal no matter what age we are at and how our bodies change. There is nothing wrong with you if you feel as though you don't really like sex right now. You just need a new context. If you are feeling stuck, there's an exercise that you can do to kind of help guide you into what kind of context you should be looking for. The exercise that Emily has, and she has a worksheet in here, so again, if you have the physical book, you can kind of find that yourself to more concretely work through this. But in essence, what the exercise is trying to do is have you look at two different experiences, a positive sexual experience and a negative sexual experience, and have you analyze those. So for instance, start with your positive one. You're going to kind of look at that and basically walk through like as much detail as you can to think about what contributed to that being a positive sexual experience. Because odds are, even if there are some things that are a little bit more one-off, there might be like a deeper meaning behind it that can explain why it contributed to being such a positive sexual experience. It could be something about your mental state. It could be something more specific about the things that happened in that sexual experience. It could be a variety of things. I don't want to like give away all of her secrets, but I will give you some of the things that she has listed in this worksheet so that way you can kind of think about it, but I won't give quite the amount of detail that she has. So first you would think about your positive experience and kind of describe it in as much details, or rather maybe not as much detail, but the relevant details that you think matter. And then the categories that you're going to start thinking about as to why it contributed to being a positive experience is your mental and physical well-being, your partner's characteristics, the relationship characteristics, the setting itself that you were in, other life circumstances, and then lucid factors / play, aka a little bit more of specifics of like the things that happened in the sexual experience. So think about those things and see what you come up with if there are some specific things in those contexts that you can pinpoint, and see if you can kind of involve in some of your future experiences going forward. Now, if we're going to also look at the not so sexy context, what you're going to do is think of a time that you had a sexual experience that did not go great. Obviously, try and gauge this from your own personal experience. It doesn't necessarily have to be something traumatic if you did have a traumatic sexual experience, just something that didn't really like hit the spot. And so you're going to kind of basically go through the same process, think through the same things: mental and physical well-being, partner characteristics, relationship characteristics, setting, other life circumstances, ludic factors. I don't know what that word means. I thought that said lucid. Ludic factors in play. Whoopsies. So consider those things, and hopefully what you can take from that when you're looking at this not so positive experience is that you can kind of identify some things and look out for what to avoid. Obviously, if you are actively with a partner right now, I think it would be great for you to talk through your findings and get a little bit more specific with them and be like, hey, so these are some context things that I noticed that contribute to a more enjoyable sexual experience for me. And then also obviously talk about the not so great things. I'm sure they're not going to mind it if it means more fun and enjoyable sex for the two of you. Take a shot at that and see what you come up with. Again, if this is something that you want a little bit more specifics on, feel free to work through these worksheets. You also don't have to just think of one sexual experience each if you don't want. If you have a few different ones that you can choose from and you feel like there's some different stuff going on there that might give you some more insights, feel free to go through this process as much as you want if it helps get you some more answers. If you want to take it a step further, you can also, she has another worksheet at the end where you identify the context that makes sex great, the context that makes sex not so great, and then identifying some like specific things that you can do and like look at how much effort that would take, what kind of impact that would have, how soon you can implement those things. And that way you kind of have some action steps of what you can do and how you can bring that into the relationship. Again, talk with your partner to see how you can evolve it. If you have a partner, involve them in it as well. And that is it for this episode. This is a really short one because of the fact that it is basic sort of thing. I didn't want to like get too far ahead into some other stuff, but also wanted to keep this all together. So we're going to stop with that. And because also this has a little bit more like practical homework, I'm going to give you a little bit of your time back. Take whatever time you would have maybe normally listened to an episode of a podcast and think a little bit about your sexual experiences and see how that goes for you. Thank you all so much for checking out this episode. Be sure to check out our next episode where we're going to be taking the concept of context a little bit further and look at how the outside world affects our sexual experiences. Have a sexy summer of love. All of the content that you hear in this podcast is curated, recorded, and edited by me truly, with special thanks to the authors Emily of the books that we cover and Pixabay for the music that we play. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you like to listen. For more of our content in between shows, you can find us at the Read Receipts Pod on Instagram and TikTok. We read all of your comments and love all of your likes, so please, please, please follow along. Until our next read,